I often say that I don't really have that much photo gear compared to other photographers. I also often lie. I never really thought I'd be making this kind of video, but I do like watching them, and also this is something for me to look back on so that a couple of years down the line I could calculate how much money I've spent on shit I barely used. So my main camera, and the one filming this right now, is... well, wait. So my main digital camera is a Fuji X-H1. I can assure you this camera has features and specs, neither of which I'm gonna dive into because this is a camera from 2018. This was the first video-centric Fuji and the first Fuji with IBIS. Now, I don't care about IBIS for stills, but for run-and-gun video, it's definitely pretty useful. If you want to do video on this camera, then you'll also have a battery grip. This grip fits 2 batteries, it unlocks longer video recording times, and it also has a headphone jack, so if you're doing actual video work, you can monitor your audio. Why is this an add-on? Why isn't there a headphone jack on the camera itself? Ugh, annoying. And speaking of annoying, even if you have this, you can't just set it and forget it. Why? Well, because the camera will stop recording whenever any of the batteries runs out. So, whether a battery in your camera dies or any of the 2 batteries in the battery grip dies, the recording will stop. And as a one-man production company, that makes me so mad. If all this makes you so mad, why you're still using this camera? Well, it's a good camera. It's also weather sealed. And honestly, I don't think I'm really pushing it to the limits. Like, I don't even shoot in log for most of my videos. So I think my biggest issue with this camera is that what originally made me switch to Fuji years ago was how small and compact the cameras were. This is a pretty hefty camera for a mirrorless. If I add the battery grip and then a bigger lens, this is pretty big, pretty thick. Like, honestly, I had DSLRs this big. Okay, now we're back to the primary camera and we can talk about my secondary camera, which is a Fuji. Fuji is my system of choice and also the system I increasingly ignore because the wisest thing you can do with your money is to spend it all on film. This is a Fuji X-T20 and it actually used to be my primary camera. Still holds up really well when it comes to stills. For video, doesn't really give me as much control as the X-H1 does. The selling point of this camera when I initially got it is that I was broke and this was basically an X-T2 in a smaller package and without weather sealing. Ever since the pandemic began, I haven't used it much. This used to be my second body for event photography, but recently I've only used it that one time when I wanted to do a 3-camera setup for my podcast. If you ever bump into me while I'm doing a photography assignment, you can see that I'm one of those annoying assholes that walk around with like 3 primes in their bag and that's it. And the only Fuji lens I have that is not a prime is the 18-55 f2.8-4. It is brighter than most kit lenses out there and it also contains optical image stabilization. I often use it for video because when you combine the optical image stabilization with the IBIS that's in X-H1, you get really smooth footage. My favorite lens is the 35mm f2, and if you look at my photography portfolio, I think probably 80% of it was actually shot using this lens. It's a really nice and versatile focal length, and also this lens is weather sealed, which when combined with a weather sealed body of X-H1 definitely allows you to shoot in, well, not the most extreme weather conditions, but still, it gives you a peace of mind. My most prized possession when it comes to Fuji lenses is the 56mm f1.2, the king of bokeh, and also a lens that'll save your ass if you're doing event photography and the light's really low. My least favorite Fuji lens is another prime, the 23mm f2. I just don't vibe with this focal length, probably because the wide-angle camera on an iPhone is roughly around 23mm equivalent, even though the lens itself is super useful and I used it a lot for paid work and for some indoor filming if the space is tight. I don't think I've ever taken a photo with it that I loved. I also have a couple of vintage lenses that I occasionally use with my digital cameras. One of them is the Helios 44. The lens is very famous, or infamous really, for its swirly bokeh. When I went to Berlin recently, I went to the flea market and I asked the guy selling photo gear there if he had anything fun for the same mount, and that's how I got this Isconar 135mm lens f4, which is honestly too much. Like, it is amazing if you want to photograph the moon, but apart from that, I have no idea what to do with it most of the time. Luckily, because it was bought on a flea market, it was only 49 euros. I got this RICOH AF35 at a flea market in Amsterdam several years ago, and it took me several rolls of film to figure out that the camera is actually broken, because sometimes I'm smart. Mine has a broken autofocus. I think the autofocus is actually stuck at a certain distance, but I don't have spatial awareness. This is a Yashica Lynx 5000, which I also got at a flea market in Amsterdam, and I have never tried it. That's it, moving on. I wasn't really sure it worked. I found a repair shop and I wanted to get them to examine it and see if it works. Then we moved cities and I just forgot about it. During the lockdown, I stopped taking photos. Well, I stopped taking photos using my digital cameras. Being a working photographer and also doing social media management on the side, I somehow never wanted to go through the hassle if I wasn't sure that that particular shot is going to be a piece of content. I wanted to make photography fun for me again, and I decided to kind of go back to my roots, and my roots were actually in analog photography. Because in my early 20s, I couldn't really afford DSLRs. I've learned photography using analog tools and analog cameras. Sadly, after switching to digital, I kind of got rid of all of my analog cameras, which is very annoying because little did I know, 10 years later, they have quadrupled in prices. I decided to buy a Nikon L35AF. This is the first generation, the one that has the exposure compensation thingy, and the one that also has filter threads. This camera is amazing. It's a fully automatic point and shoot, yes. However, the lens is great, and it was considered a top-notch lens back in 1983. Having shot a couple of rolls with this, that still stands. And last but not least, I've shown you a couple of M42 lenses that I used with my Fuji. Well, I figured it could be cool to actually have an analog camera that can take these lenses, and I got this. This is one of the last models of Zenith cameras from Russia. Yes, when you think of Zenith, you probably think the manufacturing folded way earlier than it did. The company existed up until the mid-2000s, and this camera is from 2002. I've just finished my test roll, and yeah, I'm gonna send it in for development, and we'll see what happens. So, this was my gear. Maybe I could do this every year. Do you have any of these cameras? Do you have any frustrations you'd like to share? Or is there a feature I should definitely try if I haven't already? Let me know in the comments below. If you're also using a camera model from 3 years ago and you don't intend to upgrade anytime soon, like this video and subscribe to my channel.